August 17, 1943. 30,000 feet above Germany. The sky is alive with thunder. Hundreds of B-17 flying fortresses cut through thin air, silver wings glinting under the morning sun. Each one carries 10 men, each man trusting the steel around him to keep death out. The engines roar in unison, steady and proud, a sound once called the heartbeat of American air power. Then, black smoke blossoms ahead. Flak bursts scatter across the formation. The rhythm breaks, shells tear into metal, flames trail from a wing. A bomber veers off, spiraling down through cloud. Over the intercom, voices tremble, but no one turns back. They were told the B-17 was unstoppable. Today, that belief begins to die. Below, the factories of Schweinfurt wait, and the Luftwaffe is already climbing to meet them. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress was born from America's faith in technology and precision. By the late 1930s, the U.S. Army Air Corps believed wars could be won from the sky. Bombers, not infantry, would break nations. This idea shaped everything about the B-17's design. It first flew in 1935, a four-engine giant when most bombers had only two. Its sleek frame, thick armor, and heavy defensive guns gave it an aura of invincibility. Reporters called it a fortress with wings. The name stuck. When war erupted in Europe, the B-17 stood as the symbol of modern air warfare. Its designers promised range, accuracy, and durability. Its crews trained to believe in daylight precision. The idea that bombs dropped from high altitude could cripple an enemy's war machine without touching civilians. By 1942, America was in the war. The 8th Air Force arrived in Britain, bringing hundreds of these bombers to English airfields. They flew from bases like Bassingbourn and Kimbolton, waiting for clear skies over Europe. Each mission began before dawn. Fuel trucks, mechanics, ground crews working in silence as engines warmed to life. The first missions were cautious. The Luftwaffe's defenses stretched deep, but early targets in France and the Netherlands were manageable. The B-17's guns, 13 in total, gave the crews confidence. Gunners in the nose, waist, and tail scanned the horizon, convinced their overlapping fields of fire could tear apart any German fighter that dared approach. In these early raids, the fortress lived up to its name. Even heavily damaged aircraft returned home, engines coughing smoke, fuselage ripped apart, yet still airborne. Stories spread through the ranks. Planes limping back with tails missing. Pilots guiding burning bombers onto British runways. Each story fed the myth. The B-17 could survive anything. American propaganda reinforced it. Newsreels showed smiling crews, proud of their machines. Headlines called them the flying fortresses that Hitler fears. For a time, that seemed true. But high command wanted more. Small raids were not enough. Factories in Germany still produced aircraft, tanks, and ammunition. To cripple the Nazi war effort, the Allies needed to strike deep into the industrial heart of the Reich. That meant facing the Luftwaffe head-on, with no fighter escorts that could reach that far. It was a gamble built on faith in the fortress. The target was set: Schweinfurt, home to Germany's ball-bearing industry, and Regensburg, where Messerschmitt produced the Bf-109 fighter. 2 missions, 1 day, deep into enemy territory. It would test the limits of the B-17 and the men inside. By mid-1943, the U.S. daylight bombing campaign had entered a new phase. The 8th Air Force, now seasoned after months of combat, was ready for what command called deep penetration raids. The targets lay hundreds of miles inside Germany, far beyond Allied fighter range. The plan relied on one belief: that tight B-17 formations could defend themselves. It was a bold theory. 12 bombers in a box formation could layer their guns, creating a wall of fire from every angle. In training, it looked perfect. In reality, the skies over Germany were nothing like a textbook. The Luftwaffe had adapted quickly. Squadrons of Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s waited near known bomber routes, guided by radar. Their pilots learned to attack head-on, exploiting the B-17's weakest angle, the nose. Others dove from above, targeting engines and fuel tanks. Each pass shredded formations, forcing bombers to break apart and lose protection. Still, Allied leadership pressed forward. General Ira Eaker, commander of the 8th Air Force, believed precision bombing could cripple Nazi industry. American doctrine rejected night raids, favoring visibility and accuracy. "We can hit a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet," they said. It was more hope than truth. Every mission carried the same rhythm. Crews woke before dawn, briefed on the target, flight paths, flak zones, and expected resistance. They carried lucky charms, wrote quick letters home, and walked out to their planes under gray English skies. Ground crews gave quiet nods as the engines started, the sound shaking the airfield. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg plan was complex. One force would strike Regensburg's aircraft factories, then continue south to North Africa to refuel. The second force, hours later, would hit Schweinfurt's ball-bearing plants, the critical hubs for every German tank, aircraft, and vehicle. The goal was to paralyze Nazi industry in one coordinated blow, but timing would fail them. Morning fog delayed the second group's takeoff. The gap between waves grew wider. Instead of one overwhelming strike, two smaller ones would arrive separately, giving the Luftwaffe time to regroup. German radar picked up the first wave early. Fighters scrambled from across Bavaria. Within hours, they swarmed the bombers. The sky filled with tracers, black flak clouds, and falling debris. The B-17s pressed on, flying straight into the storm. At the same moment, in British operations rooms, officers watched mission reports come in. Radio chatter broke, then went silent. The formations were shrinking. It became clear that the myth of the invincible flying fortress was about to face its hardest test yet. The mission was already in motion. There was no turning back, and above Germany, the enemy was waiting. Technological angle. The B-17 was an engineering triumph of its era. Its aluminum skin was layered over a sturdy frame that could take brutal punishment. Crews trusted its design: self-sealing fuel tanks, redundant controls, and 4 reliable Wright Cyclone engines that could keep flying even if one failed. Each gunner station was manned by specialists. Twin 50-caliber Brownings covered nearly every approach. From a distance, the bomber looked untouchable, but its strength came with limits. The B-17's armor could not withstand concentrated cannon fire from German fighters armed with 20 mm and 30 mm rounds. Its altitude advantage faded as the Luftwaffe improved climb rates and tactics. German pilots learned to strike fast and head-on, where the bomber's guns were least effective. What had been designed for defense became a test of endurance. The B-17 could take hits, but not forever. Each mission chipped away at the legend of the flying fortress. Human angle inside those metal walls, every sound mattered. The vibration of engines, the metallic clatter of the turret guns, the sharp crack when flak hit the fuselage. Crews were mostly young, many barely 20. They carried oxygen masks that froze to their faces, fingers numb from the cold. The air at 30,000 feet was thin, below freezing, and loud. Even shouting into the intercom could be drowned by the engines. For them, survival meant focus. The pilot kept formation. The bombardier locked onto the target. The waist gunners scanned the sky for a flash of sunlight, the telltale glint of a fighter closing in. They trusted their plane, their training, and each other. But with every mission, the fear grew sharper. Every man knew the odds. After 25 missions, your chance of surviving dropped below 50%. Enemy angle. The Luftwaffe met them with precision. German pilots respected the B-17 but didn't fear it. They adapted faster than Allied planners expected. The Jagdgeschwader, fighter wings, coordinated like hunters. Dozens of Bf-109s and FW-190s would wait in altitude stacks, diving in waves. Their orders were simple. Break the formation. Kill the lead bombers first. Disorient the rest. They also developed new weapons. Heavy cannons mounted under wings, rockets designed to scatter formations, and explosive shells that could rip through armor with a single hit. To the Germans, the B-17 was a worthy opponent, a symbol of American power that demanded respect, but also a clear target to destroy. They knew if they broke the myth, they could slow the Allied advance. Tactical Angle Allied Command believed in numbers. The more bombers they sent, the safer each one would be. In theory, massed formations could create mutual protection. In practice, it turned the sky into chaos. Flak bursts blinded gunners. Smoke trails made aiming impossible. When one bomber exploded, its debris tore through others flying close behind. Communication broke down. Damaged planes dropped out, losing the protection of the group. Easy prey for circling fighters. The B-17's strength as a weapon relied on coordination. Once that cracked, even the best design couldn't save it. By the summer of 1943, the mission reports told the truth no one wanted to face. The flying fortress was not unstoppable. Leadership angle. The faith in the B-17 came from the top. Generals like Ira Eaker and Karl Spaatz were convinced daylight precision bombing could end the war faster than any ground campaign. They trusted data, doctrine, and morale. To them, every bomber that reached its target was proof that the strategy worked. But decisions were made from map rooms, not cockpits. Commanders couldn't hear the gunfire or see the formations being torn apart. Their reports spoke of acceptable losses. Crews called them something else. Suicide runs. Eaker knew the risks, but the pressure to prove the American air strategy never stopped. The British bombed at night to avoid fighters. The Americans refused, believing accuracy demanded daylight. The result was bravery mixed with stubbornness. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission would test which mattered more, pride or survival. Moral angle. The bombing campaign carried a moral weight that few could name out loud. Every man aboard a B-17 knew the target below wasn't just steel and concrete. Ball-bearing factories meant workers. Regensburg's plant meant towns. The idea of precision made it easier to believe they were hitting only what mattered. But wind, flak, and stress made accuracy nearly impossible. Bombs fell miles off target. Civilians died. Crews saw towns burning and tried to justify it as strategy, not tragedy. Back home, headlines called them heroes. In the air, they saw faces through smoke. The war demanded belief, and they clung to it. But the weight stayed with them long after they landed. Strategic angle. Strategically, the raid was supposed to cripple the Reich's production chain. Ball bearings were essential. Without them, tanks, aircraft, and vehicles would stop. The idea was brilliant on paper. But even perfect hits couldn't stop an enemy that adapted as fast as Germany. After every bombing run, German workers repaired, relocated, or dispersed factories. The Luftwaffe strengthened its defenses. Flak belts thickened. Fighter bases multiplied. Every new mission demanded deeper flights and longer exposure. By August 1943, the Allies were still not breaking the German war machine. The cost was climbing. Losses hit double digits on major raids. Crews spoke quietly in mess halls, wondering how many of their friends would be gone by week's end. Psychological angle. Every mission left scars, not always physical. Some men refused to sleep after returning. Others counted bullet holes like omens. There was pride in surviving, but it came with guilt. The replacements were younger each month. Fresh faces stepping into planes that rarely returned whole. Command called it combat fatigue. The men called it what it was: fear. Still, they flew. Orders came, engines started, and the cycle repeated. The myth of invincibility gave them courage, but also chained them to impossible expectations. The world believed the flying fortress could take anything. The crews knew better. They just didn't say it out loud. As summer ended, intelligence reports warned of a new reality. The Luftwaffe was growing stronger, not weaker, and another deep raid, even bigger than before, was already being planned. It would take everything the B-17 had left to give. August 17th, 1943. The morning was clear over England. Perfect weather for what the briefers called the most important mission yet. At dawn, crews climbed into their bombers. Mechanics checked oil lines, gun mounts, and oxygen valves one last time. Ground crews waved as the first group lifted off. 400 B-17s thundered into the sky, climbing east toward the Channel. In formation, they looked unstoppable. Dozens of silver shapes stretching for miles, engines droning in rhythm. Each man carried the same belief. The flying fortress would get them there and back. Crossing the Dutch coast, black puffs appeared ahead. Flak. The radio crackled with quick orders. Formations tightened. Below, the land blurred by. They were heading deep into Bavaria. The first wave, bound for Regensburg, flew on schedule. But the second wave, targeting Schweinfurt, sat grounded in England, waiting for the fog to lift. Hours passed. The delay grew fatal. Over Germany, the Luftwaffe scrambled. Radar stations tracked the bombers from the moment they crossed the coast. Squadrons of Bf-109s and FW-190s climbed fast. Within minutes, they were among the formation. The first attacks came head-on. Cannons flashed. Armor-piercing shells tore through cockpits and engines. Bombers flamed and fell, their wings breaking away in slow motion. Crews watched friends disappear into smoke. Regensburg's defenses were fierce. Flak burst at perfect altitude. German fighters struck in waves, retreating only to rearm and dive again. The sky became a storm of fire and shrapnel. Yet the bombers held course. Formation discipline, drilled endlessly, kept the survivors together. Hours later, Regensburg came into view. Smoke covered the ground from earlier strikes, but the lead bombardier called the target. Bombs away! A chain of explosions rippled across the Messerschmitt plant. Cameras rolled, proof of success, even as flak tore open the returning planes. The surviving bombers didn't turn for home. They kept flying south toward Italy and North Africa, out of fuel, out of formation, chased by fighters until they crossed the Alps. Dozens never made it. Back in England, the Schweinfurt group finally launched. The delay meant they would face the full fury of the Luftwaffe alone. As the Regensburg survivors landed hours later in blazing heat, the Second Force was just entering German airspace, unaware that the fighters waiting above Schweinfurt were already reloaded and ready. The real disaster was still to come. The second wave crossed into Germany just after midday. Sunlight glared off aluminum wings. The bombers climbed higher, searching for stability, but the air was already thick with flak. The delay from the morning fog had doomed them before they began. German controllers watched the radar screens as the new formation appeared. Orders went out. Every available fighter scrambled. Within minutes, over 300 Luftwaffe aircraft were in the air. The first attacks came near Aachen. Bf-109s and FW-190s dove in fast, slicing through the outer edges of the formation. Bombers burst apart in midair. Debris rained down on the fields below. Radio calls blurred into static. Screams, Coordinates. Silence. By the time the formation reached Schweinfurt, it was bleeding. Still, the mission continued. The target appeared through haze, factories, rail lines, storage yards. Bomb bay doors opened. Bombs away. Explosions rolled across the city. The ball-bearing plants were hit hard, fires spreading fast. From above, the crews saw the destruction and felt a grim satisfaction. The target was destroyed, but the price had only begun. Turning home, the formation lost all protection. The fighters returned, rearmed and refueled. They struck again, now with rockets and heavy cannons. A single pass could rip a bomber in half. Gunners fought back, burning through ammunition. Some shot down attackers. Others fired until their barrels glowed red. Inside the bombers, oxygen masks froze, hydraulic lines burst, and blood turned brittle in the cold. Crew members bailed out where they could. Parachutes dotted the sky. Tiny white flowers against gray clouds. Many never opened. By late afternoon, the survivors limped back across the channel. Some landed on fumes. Others crashed short of the runway. Crews climbed out, numb, counting empty spaces where other planes should have been. Of the 376 bombers that left England that day, 60 were lost. Nearly 600 men were gone, killed, captured, or missing. The mission was a tactical success. Schweinfurt and Regensburg were hit, but strategically, it was a disaster. Loss rates above 15% meant the campaign couldn't continue. Even the most optimistic commanders knew the truth. The flying fortress had limits. For the first time, the myth broke. The invincible had become mortal. The next morning, airfields across England were quiet. Mechanics worked in silence. Hangars stood half empty. Crews stared at the empty bunks of those who didn't return. The lesson was clear. Bravery alone couldn't beat the Luftwaffe. The sky over Germany still belonged to the enemy. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid shocked Allied command. On paper, the operation had achieved its goals. Ball-bearing production had dropped, and Regensburg's aircraft plant burned for days. But the cost erased any sense of victory. The 8th Air Force had lost one in every 6 bombers it sent. No Air Force could sustain that for long. Reports flooded in from debriefings. Pilots described endless waves of fighters. Gunners spoke of ammunition running out before they reached the target. Navigators broke down, haunted by the sight of formations disappearing mid-flight. Commanders reviewed gun camera footage in silence, counting planes that never returned. Factories back home were already working overtime to replace the losses. Boeing's assembly lines turned out new bombers daily, but each one took months to build and hours to lose. The numbers didn't balance. Newspapers in the United States framed it as courage under fire. The truth, known only to the crews and planners, was harsher. They had proven the B-17's endurance, but also its vulnerability. The air war had reached a turning point. The concept of unescorted daylight bombing was collapsing. For weeks after, operations slowed. Weather and losses grounded deep raids. The Luftwaffe, emboldened by its success, prepared for more. Allied intelligence picked up German radio chatter, celebrating the victory. To the Reich, the flying fortress had finally been broken. On the bases, grief mixed with pride. Crews hung photos of missing friends on the walls of the mess halls. Mechanics painted new names on replacement bombers, trying to keep morale alive. Each mission briefing carried a new weight. The invincible image of the B-17 had cracked, and everyone knew it. In Washington, planners faced hard choices. The B-17 was still the best heavy bomber available, but it could not survive deep strikes alone. The solution would have to come from somewhere else, something faster, longer-ranged, and capable of guarding the bombers all the way to the target and back. But in the summer of 1943, that escort did not yet exist. Until it did, every new mission meant gambling lives against strategy. The airfields stayed quiet for days, engines cold, runways empty. The flying fortress had done what it was built to do: endure, strike, and survive. But it had met its limit. The myth had fallen, and reality had taken its place. The aftermath of the Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission forced the Allies to rethink everything they believed about air power. The numbers were undeniable. 60 bombers gone in one day, hundreds of crewmen lost. For every destroyed German factory, entire American squadrons had been erased. Meetings began immediately at High Wycombe and Washington. Generals, engineers, and strategists gathered around maps filled with red pins marking downed aircraft. The conclusion was clear: daylight bombing without escort fighters was unsustainable. Research teams shifted priorities overnight. The focus moved from building more bombers to extending the range of existing fighters. Engineers modified P-38s and P-47s, testing fuel drop tanks to push them deeper into enemy territory. But it was the arrival of the P-51 Mustang later that year that changed everything. With its long range and speed, it could stay with the bombers from England to Berlin and back. The balance of the air war began to tilt. In the meantime, Schweinfurt was struck again in October. The results were devastating. For the bombers, another 60 planes lost. The crews called it Black Thursday. The message was now impossible to ignore. Until the bombers had proper escort, the heart of Germany remained unreachable. The lesson reshaped Allied air doctrine. Coordination replaced faith. Technology replaced myth. Every mission afterward included fighter protection as far as range allowed. Inside the 8th Air Force, the change was personal. Survivors from Schweinfurt carried the memory for life. Some refused to fly again. Others volunteered out of loyalty to their crews. They still called their planes fortresses, but the word had changed meaning. It no longer meant invincible. It meant endurance through pain. As new Mustangs arrived, morale returned. Crews began to believe again, not in the machine, but in the system. Bombers and fighters working together. When the next deep raids came in early 1944, the results were different. The Luftwaffe, now hunted in its own skies, began to break. The B-17 never lost its place in history, but after Schweinfurt and Regensburg, it became something real, not a myth, but a symbol of sacrifice. The men who flew it had seen what invincibility really cost. The war in the air had entered its next phase, and with it came a new understanding of power, not built on belief, but on adaptation. The myth of the flying fortress was built on courage, and courage was never the problem. The men of the 8th Air Force proved that beyond doubt. What changed after Schweinfurt and Regensburg was belief, not in the plane, but in the idea that machines alone could win wars. The B-17 was still a masterpiece of its time. It could absorb punishment, strike hard, and bring its crew home against all odds. But no steel, no armor, no engine could outlast flawed strategy. The air war demanded something greater: coordination, technology, and understanding of the enemy's evolution. From that realization came the future. The long-range P-51 Mustang, new escort tactics, and radar-guided precision would all trace their roots back to that single day in 1943 when the sky over Germany turned against the flying fortress. For the men who survived, the memories never faded. The cold, the noise, the faces that didn't return. They had carried a nation's faith on their wings, and in doing so, revealed both the strength and the limits of human endurance. History remembers the B-17 as a legend, but legends are born from truth, not perfection. The moment it was finally exposed did not end its story. It made it real, and from that truth, the Allies rebuilt, adapted, and turned the air war in their favor. The flying fortress had done its duty. The myth had fallen, but the victory it helped shape would endure.